For those of you who don't know me, just to give you a little feel for what kind of a traveler I am, I have been to a handful of places around North America before this trip, so I'm not very experienced. I was very happy to have Deb with me. I highly recommend having a Deb with you on any kind of trip like this. But yeah, a few years ago when I started doing the mural work of the village out in the foyer, Den was talking about how they'd eventually have an opportunity to go see the village if we wanted to, and I thought, oh, I would love to do that. I've always wanted to do something like that. But then I immediately thought to myself afterwards, no, I won't go, because that's just who I am. But fast forward to the fall of 2021, Deborah and Tanya Nace did a presentation on child sponsorships at the Wingate location, and I was there. And I remember thinking it was just really cool, seeing in the video one of the people went to see their child sponsors over in Africa and thought that would just be so cool to go, like to get a child sponsor and go meet them someday. So I said, yeah, I want a child sponsor. So I signed up that day thinking, yeah, maybe I'll go get to meet them. And lo and behold, like a week later, Deb was like, we're gonna go to Sierra Leone, who wants to go? I was like, oh, well, I guess I gotta go. So between then and right up during the trip, there was a lot of doubts and fears. There were many times that I thought to myself, no, I'll just tell Deb I can't go, this is too scary. But there was always this overlying theme throughout the entire trip of, you can do this, God's got this, God is way bigger than your wimpy self, just do it. So I went, and I am very, very, very glad I did go. God's definitely got this, reminded me several times throughout the entire trip. Looking back, the amount of things that can go wrong in Sierra Leone are crazy, and the amount of things that actually did go wrong for us were very few, so the trip went swimmingly well. Deb will talk about that a little bit more, but the first night that we got there, I remember thinking to myself, what have I done? Why am I here? I want to go home. I was very overwhelmed. The best way to describe it was culture shock. Just this sheer difference between here and there was mind-blowing to me. I don't know what I was expecting, but it was overwhelming. And just the difference between the airports alone, like Stanfield and Sierra Leone's airport, I was just like, what is this place? But eventually I got used to it. The first night we were there, we stayed at a resort in like just near the airport, and that was one of the only nights that we had electricity throughout the entire trip. We had AC that night, but I did not sleep. I'm a light sleeper, and I'm used to sleeping with a fan blowing at my face all months of the year. So with no electricity and therefore no AC and therefore no noise to drown out any sounds around us, the sounds in the surrounding areas were interesting, like things like dogs, every dog in the neighborhood deciding to bark at each other for hours, or a nearby mosque chanting all night over a loudspeaker. That would keep you up. So I didn't sleep very much throughout the entire trip, but plus the 30-degree heat. That being said, I just accepted it after like the second night that I wasn't going to sleep and pressed on. And the village, once we got into the village, that was definitely the highlight, as it would be. They were very welcoming and accommodating, as you saw in the video. The dancing and music was so cool, and I just loved the kids. Like, watching the video made me giggle again, just watching the kids dance, their little legs, so cute. I really enjoyed the dedication ceremony that we have for the school there that was built thanks to the funds raised here. Deb got to cut a ribbon, and we were gifted a goat. I had to remember to tell you guys that. We didn't bring it back with us, sorry. But yeah, that was pretty cool. I remember sitting, like where we were sitting, the people all in front of us, the kids were over to the right, big crowd of them, like 150. And I was trying to scan the crowd to see my child sponsor, but I didn't think I was going to be able to identify her just based off the one photo that I had, so I figured I'd get some help from the people from World Hope. And after we were finished eating, Deb and I went over to talk to them and to the kids, and there she was, like right there. I just saw her face, and I knew it was her. And I hesitated at first, was like, no, I'm going to say her name, and I did, and she giggled, and she nodded, and I got really excited, and she got really excited, and then she got really scared, the poor thing, because it got very chaotic and very hectic. Like, lots of people were trying to explain to her who I was, and like there was a language barrier, of course, so I was like, you're my child sponsor, oh my gosh, and she's like, okay, lady. But we took some pictures with her. Every picture with me and her, she looks terrified. I promise you she was happy a minute earlier, but it was nice because we got to go back the second day and I got to talk to her in a less chaotic environment. And the language barrier was definitely hard, but it was still, like, I'll remember it for the rest of my life. It was awesome to speak to her and try and teach her my name. It's not a hard name to learn, so it's pretty good. Yeah, I really enjoyed the village. I loved the area that we stayed in near the village, Kamakwi. It was less hectic and bustly than the cities, of course, because it was more rural, and I'm a country girl anyway, so it was kind of nice for me, less overwhelming. And one of the things, here's an example of the culture shock for me. One of the things that really threw me was when we got there, I didn't realize that almost every place we were going to stay was going to be surrounded by a compound, like 10-foot tall concrete walls topped with barbed wire and sometimes shards of glass for security, and that threw me. I was like, what is happening? What is this place? But eventually, obviously, it made you feel safe. But when we stayed in Kamakwi, we stayed on the hospital compound, and that was the only place that didn't have that, but I still felt safe there. I liked it there, aside from the heat. But yeah, on the weekend, once we headed back to McKinney, which was the city that we had been in before, we hung out with Jeff and Carrie Jo Kane. They are missionaries that live there full time. They work for World Hope and other global partners, and witnessing the work that they do was just incredible. I was very overwhelmed with admiration and a little bit of, there was a lot of emotions to process for me throughout the entire trip. Some of it, lots of good and lots of bad. There was definitely a lot of guilt that I had to work through, and anger at myself for being such a wimp. Witnessing the work that Carrie, Jo, and Jeff do and comparing myself to them, just here I am living in Canada, I can hardly handle a week here, look what these people do, it's amazing. And working through that was really important for me because it eventually just got to the point of gratitude and peace in my heart, immense gratitude for everything that I have, but also for the opportunity to even go and meet all these wonderful people. So that was definitely a big turning point in my feelings for the trip. And then, yeah, we ran around McKinney with Carrie Jo, and we got to go to the women's conference, as you guys saw. I thought that was really cool to see, the sea of purple, the branded dresses was really neat. And then the second day at church, we got to go to the women's conference again, and they were all dressed in a sea of color, which was awesome. And they were just so happy and fun and charismatic. I loved watching them perform and dance and sing. I loved the music, the singing and whatnot. And then towards the end, we went to Freetown with Jeff and Carrie Jo, and we finished off the trip at a beautiful beach resort. And they had power at night, and I slept. It was glorious. But we also got to go to the World Hope office in Freetown, and we met a whole bunch of people that work there, and the work they're doing there is incredible. We got to speak to the anti-trafficking group, and we went out with Enable the Children, which was very, very humbling. I'm sure Deb will talk a little bit more about it. Phenomenal to witness what these people do. I just was blown away. All in all, if any of you feel the way I do, if you're a little bit wimpy like me, but you've always wanted to do something like this, do it. You won't regret it. And that's why I went, because I knew if I didn't, I'd regret it. So God's got it.
This was such a God-ordained trip. I first went to Sierra Leone in 2018 to look around to see what Cornerstone could do there and how we could partner with World Hope. And the village came out of it as kind of a surprise because that wasn't our initial thought, because it was quite a large commitment. And then we made the decision to do it, and people in Cornerstone just blew us away with how much money we were able to raise. And I knew that God's hand was in this trip right from the beginning, because every plan that was supposed to happen kept falling through. We were supposed to go last year, and obviously that didn't happen. And then we started planning for this year, and we had a good number of people interested, and the numbers just kept dropping because the world still seemed scary. And so it was just Bee and I, and that was fine, and it was such a great trip with the two of us. But 2 weeks before we were getting ready to go, I've avoided this for 2 years, and I tested positive for COVID, and I was like, because you had to do a PCR test 3 days before flying out to Sierra Leone, and a PCR test and a rapid test when you landed. And I was like, I don't think I can pull that off. I'm not sure if I can. And so 6 days after testing positive on a rapid, I tested negative on a rapid. And I told Stefan I willed it out of my body. He said that's not how it works, but whatever. I also have this great problem where I talk to people I probably shouldn't, and I got a WhatsApp number for the high-up doctor officials in Sierra Leone, and I messaged them asking if they might be changing their rules before we come. And they sent me a new notice saying that they just changed their rules. And we didn't have to test to enter the country. They changed it 3 days before we had to leave. So we knew that God's hand was in this right from the beginning. We showed up at the airport with our 7 suitcases between the two of us, filled with toys and some supplies for Carrie Jo on the ground. And somehow we got all of our suitcases checked and loaded, and they all arrived, because that's how I know God's hand was in this trip. All of our flights, we had friends, while we were traveling, I had friends posting on Facebook how they were stuck in Jamaica because Sunwing had stopped flying places. Every one of our flights was on time, we didn't have any delays, and we landed with no issues. And so that's how I knew God's hand was in this trip. And so we traveled around the country. We didn't sleep very many nights in one place, and we got to travel around, and then we ended up at the village, and the school was being dedicated while we were there. That was decided like 3 days before we arrived. So they didn't even know. We didn't know it was going to be happening. We didn't really know what was going to happen. We knew we were going to be doing a meal with the community, but we got to be at the school dedication, and so the school was being handed over to the village that day. And so it was us and the community and leaders from the Wesleyan Church and leaders from the government, from the Department of Education were there, and we got the chance to just sit and have this experience with the community as the school was being given over to the community. We got to meet a lot of the teachers that teach from the elementary to high school age. And it was just such a wonderful experience. And after 2 years of having rules like being 6 feet apart, it was a little overwhelming because there was no bubble. All the kids were just like, hello. And you're like, oh, hi. And it was 38 degrees that day. So we got to do that, and it was just such a neat experience. And one of the men that was there was the Wesleyan evangelist for the area, Pastor Andrew, and he shows the Jesus film in different villages. And so he had shown it last year in our village, but he decided he wanted to show it again. And so we were supposed to be there for it last year. And I was really sad that we missed out on that last year. And so all of a sudden it was a surprise, and we were able to come back to the village that night and get to take part. And they had a dual screen up, and so it was shown on both sides. And everyone, like a lot of people in the village came out. This is quite a highly populated Muslim village and area, and so they got to see the Jesus film in their language. And they got to experience that, and Pastor Andrew told the kids, he said, listen, you have to pay attention because tomorrow we're going to get together and we're going to do trivia. And so the kids all had to pay attention because we had given out a large majority of the toys the first day, which was chaotic. Picture Christmas morning, but with 150 kids. It was wild. So we had leftover toys the next day, and so we used those as trivia prizes. And so the kids had to answer questions about the Bible and about what they saw in the Jesus film. And it was really great, and Pastor Andrew was absolutely amazing with them. And we had a couple staff from World Hope with us that should just run camps all the time because they were so good with the kids and just knew how to, obviously they spoke their language and they were able to just be with them in a way that we couldn't because of that language barrier. But with their help, we were able to hang out with them for the day. And that was such a neat experience. And yes, we were gifted a goat. Last time I was gifted a chicken, and I'm terrified of birds. This time we were gifted a goat, and they told us we couldn't take him home on the plane, so we gave him to someone, and he's now their pet, I'm sure. And it was just, it was such a neat experience just getting to hang out. We did a meal. We paid for the meal that we ate together as a community, and that was a wonderful experience. Part of being on a World Hope trip is that you don't just do one thing. You get to experience a whole bunch of different things while you're there. And so, like we said, we stayed in different locations and just died of heat all night long. But we were at the Kamakwi Hospital, which is a Wesleyan hospital, And there's 2 missionaries there right now. They're a doctor and a nurse couple, and normally they're in Haiti. And they are currently in Sierra Leone for a few months, and we got to hang out with them and just talk with them and make connections with them. And that's something you get to do when you're on missions trips, is just make connections with people who are there. And so while we were there, as you all know, our church loves giving blood. We have blood donor clinics. It's a big deal here. But if you're in certain countries, you can't give for a certain amount of time. And because Sierra Leone has a malaria, you could get malaria there, you can't give in Canada. And I'm O negative, and so they love my blood here. And I said to Dr. Bob, Dr. Bob, I'm O negative. I said, if you need blood while I'm here, like, cool, you can take it. And he was like, he grabs his phone, and all of a sudden he's like, patient is O positive, and we have a volunteer who's O negative. All right, let's go. I was like, oh, you mean like right now? So let me drink some water maybe first, because I'm severely dehydrated, I'm sure. Anyway, so we went down to the hospital, and a lab tech pricked my finger and put it on like a tile, like off of a wall, and like did things to it, and he did this for a while, and then he was like, yep, O negative. I was like, all right. And then they laid me down on a bed and put a needle in me and started taking my blood. I said, I bleed really fast, just as a heads up. And I'm laying on the bed, and there's a broken chair holding my blood bag. Very different than when it's here, guys. You should give blood here. And they took my blood, and halfway through, Bee and Marsha, the nurse from the couple, are like, is that a dead frog on the floor? And I was like, it better be dead, because if it starts moving, there's going to be blood everywhere. It didn't. It was dead. I don't know if that made me feel better or not. Anyway, they took my blood, and they were able to give it to a patient who needed it that night. It was just such a neat experience, because it's something so important in who we are as a church. You know, that's something we talk about a lot, that you have resources in you, resources in your homes, resources in who you are as a family, and being able to use those to help others is so important. So that was just a really great experience for me personally. It was on my bucket list to do, so I got to check that off. And so after that, after we spent our few days in the village, we got to kind of look around the village and see the different things that we had done as Cornerstone. And so you saw the deep borehole well. So that well, it's dry season right now. It's very, very dry season right now. And they were saying that our well in the vicinity is one of the very few wells that people can actually get water from, because it's dug properly, because that's what World Hope does. In the video, there was a huge amounts of fields, and as soon as the rain starts coming, they're going to be able to plant those. And one of the high school teachers was saying he's going to be teaching it in his classes, agriculture and how to plant seeds, because they now have the training to do that. They have the understanding of how to plant and grow and then sell and continue on with this for their community. We got to see the latrines. There's some set up for the school, and then there's some set up on the other side of the school, so that when people are out in the fields, they're able to come over and use the latrines that are there. And we got to just see all these different things that had been done because of Cornerstone. And it was just so amazing to see how this village had changed, and how they were talking about how they were going to have new homes being built in the area because they're able to sustain that now. It was marvelous to see. At the end of our trip, we were back in Freetown, and that's where some of the other World Hope projects take place. And we went around with Enable the Children, which works with kids with disabilities. And kids with disabilities in Sierra Leone are seen as burdens. They're seen as maybe demon-possessed. They're seen as children who are not worth having. And so World Hope comes in with trained physiotherapists and trained people who can come in and not only give help and medical service to these families, but also to train their families, their teachers, their community members, that these kids are God's children, that these children are worth living, that these children are worth having in their homes, in their communities. And so while we were there, we went around with 2 different World Hope members, and one of them, Paul, I went with last time. And so it was neat being able to go back with him and see how they provide different supplies to the families. One of the little girls in the photos you might have seen, she had splints on her legs, and those are locally made, and they go around her legs so she can stand up and so she can walk. And they do these different things so that the family members have a chance to watch their kids grow up. And it was amazing just getting to go around to these different areas and just be with the World Hope staff as they did their job. Yeah, it was absolutely wonderful. And so if you have any questions, Bee and I will be out in the lobby after church, and we'd love to share more about what we did. We absolutely had a fantastic time despite sweating to death. And yeah, we'd love to answer any questions you might have.